the new constitution for Zimbabwe, which was adopted by the referendum that was carried out on the 21st of March 2013, in respect of which 93% of the participants, representing about 3 million people, voted for this constitution. So this constitution, in section 89, defines the office of the president, and in chapter 5 of the constitution, it sets up the office of the president. In section 91, subsection 2 of the constitution is very clear. It says a person is disqualified for election as president or vice president if he or she has already held office as president under this constitution for 2 terms, whether continuous or not, and for the purposes of this subsection, 3 or more years service is deemed to be a full term. This therefore means legally that Mr. Mnangagwa, to the extent that he has served from 2018 and is now on his 2nd term, cannot and will not be eligible to be president of the Republic of Zimbabwe again. But there are, as you said, we are entering into a unknown territory. Your topic is presumptive of the common cause legal position that the constitution imposes a term limit. But what your topic fails to recognize that elsewhere on the African continent, it has become fashionable to actually change term limits and for sitting presidents to actually push for 3 terms. We have seen the attempts of Abdoulaye Wade in Senegal to change the constitution to a 3rd term. We have seen the attempt of Wade's successor, President Sall, to actually change the constitution. We have seen the successful attempts of President Ouattara or Cote d'Ivoire of actually changing the term limits and pushing the term limits. We've seen Denis Sassou Nguesso do the very same thing in the Congo, Brazzaville. We've also seen the same thing happening in Rwanda. We've seen the failed attempt by President Joseph Kabila in the Democratic Republic of Congo to extend the term further. But even if he failed to succeed, he was president for more than 3 years after his term of office had expired. I want to say that legally, any sitting president who attempts to change the constitution faces the hurdle posed by section 328 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. The Constitution of Zimbabwe makes it clear that if someone has to change the constitution, and if someone has to change a provision in the constitution that sets time limits or term limits, and remember, our constitution provides term limits for different offices, including number 1, the Speaker of Parliament, the President, executives in the army, the Chief Justice, and many others. So the Constitution says in section 328, subsection 6, that where if a constitutional bill is passed by 2/3 of Parliament and it amends a constitutional term, i.e., it increases a constitutional term, that constitutional amendment must be subjected to a referendum. This is so in terms of section 328, subsection 6 of the Constitution. Now, one can get a referendum. One can actually get a yes in a referendum. We know that Zimbabwe's political context is not even and equal. We've just come from a contested election, and I'm going to come to that election very soon. However, when we negotiated this constitution, and I was one of the one of the negotiators, we put in a provision, section 328, subsection 7, which makes it clear that a constitutional amendment extending a term of office shall not benefit the incumbent. So if Mr. Mnangagwa, in his wisdom or lack thereof, were to push for a constitutional amendment to extend or to remove the limitation, the two-term limitation provided by Section 91, subsection 2, that amendment would not benefit him. So if you want to amend the Constitution, to amend constitutional terms, to increase constitutional terms, the law says it can't benefit you. Now, we saw in Senegal that President Wade tried to do this. So we put in a provision in the Constitution, which we called colloquially the Abdoulaye Wade provision. This provision is section 328, subsection 7 of the Constitution. And this says now that, so you now have two things. The first one is the amendment to the Constitution that you would have done, that requires the referendum. Then you have a provision, that subsection 7, that says you can't benefit. Now, the Constitution then says, if you want to amend section 328, subsection 7, which says you can't benefit from an amendment of the Constitution because, which is extending a time limit, you have to go to another referendum. But here is the double protection. The two referendums, the one in respect of which you are amending the Constitution to extend the term limit, and the constitutional, in the referendum in which you are amending section 328, subsection 7, so that you remove the provision that says you can't benefit from it. The two referendums can be held simultaneously, concurrently. They have to be a separate referendum. So that means that if any sitting president wants to amend the Zimbabwean constitution and wants to amend section 91(2), which provides a term limit on the president, he requires four things. Number one, a constitutional majority, 2/3 of parliament. Then a constitutional referendum that approves that constitutional amendment. And if he wants it to benefit him, another parliamentary, 2/3 parliamentary majority, in respect of which parliament agrees to remove section 328, subsection 7, and then a second referendum, which makes it extremely difficult for the constitution to be amended and to allow a president to serve a third or fourth term. In my view, so this is the legal position. I thought I would explain the legal position, but I'm here to give my thoughts on the political economy of our country in the next 5 years. I think that there are 5 critical things that are going to determine how this country is going to move forward in the next 5 years. Number one, we have undisputedly a contested election. The SADC report, the Commonwealth, the SADC SEO report, SADC Election Observer Mission report, the report of the Carter Center, the report of the Commonwealth Observer Mission, President Goodluck Jonathan's report for and on behalf of the African Union, all agreed that this election did not meet electoral standards. I like the concluding paragraph of the SADC report. So it is an election that is fraught and arrested by the challenge of illegality, by the challenge of illegitimacy, the same challenge of illegitimacy that arrested the 2018 election. And as a result of that tag of illegitimacy, we went through 5 years, 2018, to 2023 through a shadow, through a polity of conflict, through a polity of toxicity, of division, of stagnation, of ossification, if you like. And I will speak about the economy a little bit later on. So the danger then is that we can't reproduce the contested consensus of the last 5 years, in respect of which Zimbabwe has operated on the consensus of discord, of division and toxicity, with all the consequences and multiplier effect of that division. We saw the total collapse of public services, total collapse of public service wages. This economy can't can't survive another 5 years of stagnation and ossification that we've seen between 2018 and 2023. So one of the critical determinants of how we move in the next 5 years is whether or not there is a political dialogue, whether or not inspired by SADC, whether or not there will be a dialogue between President Mnangagwa and President Chamisa to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe. There are many efforts towards this, and I refer to what Dr. Mandaza is trying to do, the idea of a national transitional authority. So the first determinant of how we are going to move forward is whether or not we can create a soft landing for the Zimbabwean crisis through dialogue and through some accommodation of some sort. And this can't be just elite pact. It has to be a qualitative process that is targeted at reforms. The second issue that is going to be a key determinant is how we manage the economy. How we manage the economy is going to be determined by whether or not there's some kind of political solution. But the following are going to be key things. I'm winding up. The following are going to be key things in the management or lack thereof of the economy. Number one, are we able to manage the exchange rate? Are we able to control budget deficits, to control a broad money supply, because it has got a catalytic effect on inflation? Are we able to continue? Are we able to live within our means? What I used to call eating what we kill. Are we able to conduct structural reforms in the economy? Are we able to deal with the corruption and illicit financial flows that are costing this country? Are we able to deal and affect the deep state that is killing this economy, as we saw, for instance, in the gold mafia documentary? Number three, as a critical determinant of how this country is going to move forward, is the question of the international community. Are we going to be able to engage and re-engage the international community so that all forms and barriers of isolation are eliminated? Are we going to be able to successfully negotiate the debt, Zimbabwe's debt, overwhelming debt burden, which is now 130% of GDP? The answer to that question is political. Are we able to unlock the political gridlock? Because you cannot decouple international re-engagement from the political toxicity associated with stolen elections, violence, incarceration of activists. Job Scholar has been in prison for more than a year. So the international factor is going to be key. But there's another dimension of the international factor that I want to mention. There is a move towards the creation of a multipolar world. We see what is happening in BRICS and many efforts. We see the growing influence of China and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that, and we encourage that. However, I feel is the emergence of a new polarized world between the West and the East, Russia and China in BRICS on one hand, and the West on another hand. And I see this a situation where Zimbabwe will unwittingly take a side and become a pawn in a much larger geopolitical fight, which we shouldn't be concerned with at all. We are too small, too insignificant to be part of that fight. In fact, I would make the same case for Africa. Africa's contribution to global trade is less than 3%. That means that we have no fight in the emerging discord and discourse of this multipolar discordant, as I would want to submit. So that attempt to incorporate ourselves in the discord of this emerging insanity, for a lack of a better word, will also determine how this country is going to move in the next 5 years. Lastly, as a major determinant is the succession question. The succession question is now with us because the constitution puts a full stop on Mr. Mnangagwa's term of office. He has three choices. Number one is to allow the constitution as it is and not to seek an amendment. Trying to seek an amendment to section 91 of the constitution and to section 328 will create major conflict in the country. And by conflict, I'm not necessarily talking of physical conflict, but it will create such a matrix of instability, including potentially the intervention of the army. So it will be dangerous. So let's assume that that debate is not on the table. He's not going to do that. And for his sake and his legacy, I hope he's not seduced into the fallacy of thinking that he can actually amend the constitution. But I've heard him say 2030, and to me, as a constitutional lawyer, that can only happen if Chapter 5 of the Constitution is amended and if Section 328 of the Constitution is amended. But assuming we're not arrested with the insanity of a constitutional amendment, the next question is who actually succeeds him? If he dies, and I hope he doesn't die, if he dies, the position is clear. Whoever is his vice president takes over. Remember, we removed the running mates provisions of Chapter 5. But if he doesn't die, it means that the succession question is with us. Does it mean that Vice President Chiwenga will take over, or there will be another war towards succession, just like the same uncertainty that we experienced in the period of President Mugabe? So to me, these four things are going to be critical. 4 or 5 things are going to be critical. Number one, are we able to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe in light of a contested election? Number two, are we able to carry out the massive structural economic reforms that are required going forward? Number three, are we able to carry out a program of international re-engagement that can break the barriers of isolation? Number four, is Zimbabwe capable of succession? So far, we've been unable, as a country, 44 years of independence, this country has not been able to carry out a succession. It was not a legal succession in 2017. It was a military coup. So this is a great test for the main actors. It is also a great test for Zimbabweans. So we as citizens, I think, have a say. We mustn't be innocent bystanders. So I submit that there must be agency of the citizen so that we are not objectified by elite rapture, which is as foreseeable as it is unavoidable. So I would submit, Mr. Chairman, that we need citizen agents in parliament, in civic society, in the courts. Some of us are constitutional lawyers, will be taking many constitutional challenges and so forth. So ultimately, if we have a strong citizen, I think we'll be able to mitigate some of the potential excesses that will come from the thesis that I've just presented above. I will stop here for now.
Thank you, Mr. Biti. Thank you for that submission. I see Mr. Mpofu, Dr. Mpofu is available again. If you could unmute your mic, Dr. Mpofu, and take the floor, please. Dr. Mpofu, go ahead, please. We seem to be having a challenge getting Dr. Mpofu on to speak. Perhaps we can open the floor. Let's see who we have here. Anyone who has requested to speak? Okay, I think we've got Dr. Mpofu back. Let's see if this works now. Dr. Mpofu? Well, I think we seem to be having challenges there. Let's just ask, or just get one of our readers to intervene here. Ngobile, the floor is yours. Ngobile, please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes, I just had a question for Mr. Biti because of certain statements that he just made. We have a new constitution. ZANU-PF is a whole political machine. What makes you so sure that now we have a constitution and we have Idi Mnangagwa going on to his second and final term? What makes you think that ZANU-PF cannot produce another leader to lead Zimbabwe?
Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. Biti.
Can you just allow a few comments so that I can just...
Okay, a few others. Okay, you can answer them at the same time. Okay, we've got another request to speak from Danny. Please go ahead. Danny?
Hi, thank you.
Please, yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for this platform, and I'm glad it's Mr. Biti on the stage here. My question is, or first of all, I'll pass it on with a comment. The election was said to be fraudulent. You have decided, or your party has decided to take part in this fraudulent parliament or constituted by fraudulent election. How on earth are you going to be able to achieve some of the things that you have promised to achieve, taking into account now you have taken part in this fraudulent result? Now you have legitimized ZANU-PF. Now you say that you're going to participate, but you're returning to the cycle that we have seen over the years. Complain, this time you just keep quiet, get into parliament, and then blame ZANU-PF where you have failed. How are things going to change this time without taking alternative steps to address the problems that we are facing? Because this looks like the easy way out, if you have to ask me. And I think it's shameless that your party has decided to participate after declaring yourselves that this was indeed a fraudulent election, instead of fighting for a re-election while you are out. Put yourself under pressure to do some work. But now we see you're in the same parliament. We know what the result is going to be. And how are we going to hold you accountable what kind of things are you gonna are you trying to achieve? Because when there's posters saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna have an early election soon," what happens if you fail? Because we know you're going to fail, and blame ZANU-PF sabotage. I would like some clarity regarding that. This is not an attack. I just want clarity as a Zimbabwean who now has to be represented by an entirely fraudulent parliament, a de facto government that has no legal basis to call themselves, honorable. This is very dishonorable, I'm sorry to say. Many thanks.
Thanks, Danny, for your contribution. I think we'll return it to Mr. Biti.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, let me answer the first question. Yes, ZANU-PF is a machinery, and it is precisely because of that machinery that this constitution was created in the phrases that I've spoken. I've just highlighted. A good constitution is based on mistrust. You actually mistrust the incumbent. You actually assume that he's going to do terrible things, and therefore you create a legal framework, a legal infrastructure that seeks to vaccinate against the potential insanity, against the potential derogation. So the provisions of the Constitution dealing with term limits were actually based on utmost mistrust that whoever is going to be a president in this country will want to amend the constitution. So there's treble protection. The first one is that parliament, there must be 2/3 parliamentary approval of the bill amending section 91 of the constitution, the two-term provision. Secondly, you've got the protection of section 328 subsection 7, which says if you amend a term limit, it will not benefit you. And again, to amend that, you need 2/3 majority, and you need a referendum. And the two referendums can be held together. I don't think, I'm not a member of ZANU-PF, I'm not a spokesperson for ZANU-PF, but I can assure you that there will be so many people in ZANU-PF who will be against the potential desire to amend the constitution. Zimbabwe has got 14 million people. ZANU-PF was voted by literally whatever, 1 million people. I'm sure in that 1 million people, the majority would not want to see an amendment of the constitution. So despite the machinery of ZANU-PF, despite its control of state institutions, I can assure you there will never be agreement around amendment of that constitution. We've had a constitutional referendum in this country. We had a constitutional referendum on the 10th and 11th of February 2000. And the people of Zimbabwe, despite ZANU-PF's machinery, said no to a proposed constitution, the Chijao Commission. I have no doubt in my mind that if they try to amend the constitution, this will be the biggest fight of our generation, and people will resist this, including people in ZANU-PF. I come to Dennis' question that participating in parliament is legitimizing the fraudulent election. I with respect, I strongly disagree. Participating in parliament does not legitimize a process that was illegitimate and that was not credible. In political economy, and I can see Professor Jonathan Moyo, when you are an opposition like us, an alternative movement, in a socially dominated framework such as ours, when you're fighting one of the most complicated authoritarian regimes on the continent, you do four things. The first thing you do is you protect zones of autonomy. The second thing you do is you build a credible alternative. The third thing you do is you expose and isolate the opponent. The fourth thing you do is you stretch the opponent. I view our participating in this election as protecting a zone of autonomy. That space that we got, those 103 seats that we got, we have a right and a duty to protect those zones. To me, I've been a legislator for a long time. Parliament is a very powerful platform for defending the constitution, for defending citizen interests and advocating citizens' interests. So to me, it's not a brainer. The elected MPs must participate in that platform. What is required, Danny, is to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe, is to avoid another 5 years of stagnation, another 5 years of toxicity, another 5 years in respect of which the country veers to almost a genocidal status quo, Rwanda in 1994, for instance. So to me, there must be dialogue. To me, there must be discussion. I hope SADC will act on its report and allow a dialogue to take place so that there is a soft landing for this country. We can't afford another 5 years of the same ossification that we've seen in the last 5 years. As I'm talking to you right now, thousands and thousands of Zimbabweans are trying to cross crocodile-infested Limpopo into South Africa. Thousands are applying for visas at the British Embassy, at the American Embassy. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. So this election is triggering yet another vicious wave of immigration, illegal and otherwise. We've become the sick men of the region. I would submit that let's find a sustainable a solution to the Zimbabwean crisis, and that sustainable solution requires the fronting by SADC and requires a dialogue.
Sorry, may I just say, sir, you did not answer my question. I asked you, what makes you think that after these 5 years that ZANU-PF cannot churn out another leader? As you allude that ZANU-PF is a political machine, what makes you think that ZANU-PF may even attempt to amend the constitution? What makes you think that ZANU-PF cannot churn out another leader?
No, I didn't say that. On the contrary, I said, listen exactly to what I said. I say that I hope they will not be moved to amend the constitution. I hope the incumbent President Emerson Dambozo Mnangagwa, will not be seduced to want to amend the constitution, because that will divide this country and set this country on a dangerous precipice. We don't want that. That's my submission. And I said there are 14 million people, including people in ZANU, who can become presidents in this country. That's what I said. But I also warned that the fact that he doesn't wish to amend the constitution does not mean that we don't have a succession challenge on our hands. The running mate provisions were removed by Parliament through Constitutional Amendment number 1 of 2018. Before they were removed, the first running mate would succeed the president. Now we don't have that, meaning that even if the mere removal or the mere refusal to be seduced by the demon of wanting to amend the constitution, that means that we are now back squarely to where we were when President Mugabe was alive, which is the succession question and how it is resolved. And I hope it can be resolved amicably and legally and with decency. That is my submission.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied with your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biti. Bashwana wishes to speak. Please unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thanks, ZimLive, and thanks to Comrade Biti there. I've got 2 questions for Mr. Biti, mainly on the issues of the constitution itself. Number one, I would kindly ask Mr. Biti about the processes which happened in his political parties, political party, which in so many, millions of Zimbabweans were left, with no words to comment or to say about the processes which seems to be, controlled in one man's office. I would give example of Councillor Court at the new councillor for Ward 4, where he was then, right now as it is in terms of the laws, Mr. Bita, I cannot lecture him about the laws. Who is being, I would say, detected to the people of Bulawayo to say Mr. Kothat should be a mayor of Bulawayo. Yet there is a process which are supposed to be followed in terms of the Urban Council Act of 2015, and so forth. I want Mr. Biti to explain to us this assertion of Nelson Chamisa, his president, of detecting to people, this one should be this one should be this. What kind of leadership, as you say yourself, that you are alternative and basing on what happened on your elective processes or whatever selection processes, which left so many millions of Zimbabweans, unbelievable, where we ended up having in ballot papers 4 or 5 candidates or 3 candidates, 2 candidates for one ward or for one constituency. And then lastly, I want Mr. Biti probably to explain to us the issue of delimitation, because the opposition, in this case, I would say the opposition, which is CC actually in its reasoning, they said that we didn't go to the court to challenge this election outcome simply because the courts are captured or the courts are going to be biased in terms of the packages or whatever the remunerations which were given to the judges. But at the same time, we have got opposition MPs who benefited on the last sitting, 40,000, 50,000 Ks and so forth. We discuss about this issue. So I want him to balance us here. Where is this supposed to be done? And I'll end by saying, in their reasoning as well, they quoted Mr. Monzora to say Mr. Monzora went to court and his matter was dismissed. But these are the very same people who were saying Monzora doesn't want to go to the election. He wants to give ZANU-PF another, leapfrog to contest in this election. So I want, is this political statements or are now the reality of life that Zimbabweans should receive from the politicians who are going to benefit in these kind of processes as we can talk about. Thank you so much, the ZimLive, and thanks so much, Comrade Biti, to grace this platform. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bashona. I don't know whether Mr. Biti would like to answer that, because it's a bit of
I think let me
diversion from.
Yeah, let me have two, three more questions.
Okay, all right. There's a gentleman with the.
And if the person's asking, can ask their name so that I can write them.
Okay, that would be very useful. Please go ahead. I think it says KEK.
Yeah, Danny was before me with his hand up, but if you'd like to call.
Okay, sure. Okay. I thought we'd already given a chance to Danny to speak. I don't know. Danny, go ahead.
I've spoken before, but if he allows me to, I can just be quick about it. Biti, I'm sorry, but your response to my question was unsatisfactory. First of all, we had the same situation in the last term, for previous 3 or 4 terms. And MDC was in parliament, and it failed to deliver on the reforms that were needed. It failed to prevent the constitution from being amended in the last term. It failed miserably, actually. And currently, ZANU-PF still has a majority where they can push ordinary legislation. And we know what kind of legislation they like pushing. And CCC can stop it with its current number of MPs and so forth. From my own opinion, CCC has no bargaining power to bring ZANU-PF to the table, regardless of the SADC and AU reports, which ZANU-PF is completely discrediting and will not, bend to unless real pressure is applied. So I trust and believe from previous and past references that they are not going to be able to deliver the kind of things that they are promising right now, because we have learned from this from the past. We have seen it before. There's not an attack, there's an appreciation of the reality and a plea to change strategy. And the councillors, the same dynamic is with our councillors. We all know they don't possess the kind of power that they need to address the kind of problems that are bedeviling our communities. Very soon they'll be telling us ZANU-PF and the ministry are blocking us and doing this and doing that. The circumstances haven't changed. What I thought CCC was going to do was, before they step into parliament, at least apply the kind of pressure that guarantees an environment that allows for them to perform. Right now, those impediments still exist, and yet you're still promising to deliver, and you have not been able to say, okay, if we fail to deliver, this is how we are going to hold ourselves accountable to you, because you continue to fail. And I know for the most part, it's not your fault. ZANU-PF is very ruthless, and we get that. But it's about time we started standing with Zimbabwean people and taking a little bit more difficult decisions and stop taking the easy way out. This is the easy way out, I believe. And the more we continue on this cycle, the more the ordinary person suffers. While you respectfully saying, and your MPs and so forth, enjoy the perks, enjoy the taxes, enjoy the status of being in parliament, while the ordinary Zimbabwean is being deprived of his land by foreigners, while the ordinary Zimbabwean cannot get into a hospital and be treated for simple ailments and diseases, while the student in school is failing to have books and so forth, but you are there in parliament getting cars, getting 40,000s and so forth, failing to deliver. Now, this is, like I said, this is not an attack. This is an appreciation of the reality. And I would like to hear something different, to at least have time frames to say, we are going to achieve this. We have taken this step. Within this time, we are going to achieve this. And if we fail, please hold us accountable in this way. Many thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Biti?
Yeah. So I came here to speak on the last term president of Zimbabwe dive into the unknown. That's the mandate. I'm not privy to many of the internal issues you were raising, and I certainly don't have a mandate to speak for them. But all I can tell you is that we held successful processes. We have produced 103 MPs under extremely difficult circumstances. We have prevented ZANU-PF from having a 2/3 majority, and I think that should be recognized. Oftentimes, it's easy to blame, which is understandable. But I think that citizens must also understand that they've agency, they're actors. Don't be objects of your environment. You must have citizen agency. The issue of delimitation, I think delimitation was a disaster. I think delimitation was illegal and unconstitutional. The constitution is very clear that constituencies are supposed to be divided equally. We had 5.4 million registered voters as of May 2022. That meant that the average constituency ought to have been around 28,000. The constitution allows a variation of 20%, which would have meant that the smallest constituency should have been around 24,000 people, the biggest constituents around 30,000. But we had constituencies that are around 34,000, and in some cases 20,000. So the 20% rule was not respected. I think the quest towards a proper delimitation is not over, whether it's going to be done by Parliament itself pushing a resolution, or whether it's going to be done by courts of law, because I'm aware of outstanding legal cases. I'm not a prophet, I can't tell you, but what I can tell you as a lawyer is that the delimitation was improper, and we strongly argued against the same on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of January 2023, when the issue was debated in Parliament. The issues that Denny you raise, I think that you can't blame us for the passage of Constitutional Amendment number 1 and Constitutional Amendment number 2, and those were terrible constitutional amendments, particularly Constitutional Amendment number 2, which in one piece of legislation, 35 amendments were made. But you forget one thing, that when those bills were actually debated, most of us had actually been recalled. And I suspect that the reason why some of us were removed, in particular myself, was because they wanted to push those constitutional amendments. We took the illegal constitutional amendments to court. We have lost. There's only one constitutional challenge that is pending, based on the basic structure doctrine, that you can't amend the constitution. Amending its basic structure, it loses its identity. Therefore, it's not a constitutional amendment. The bottom line is that the 20 March 2020 judgment in the matter of Thokozani Kupe versus Nelson Chamisa, which gave our party to Dr. Monzora and Dr. Kupe, really affected and had disastrous consequences on our presence in the 9th session of Parliament, and allowed the smooth passage of those constitutional bills. So we can't be judged on that. I think that there have been challenges in local authorities. It's again easy to blame the councillors, but I think one of the problems you forgot is that the Urban Councils Act and the Rural District Councils Act have not been harmonized with the new constitution, the 2013 constitution. In particular, there is no respect to chapter 14 of the constitution that makes it clear that local authorities have to be run by those that are elected in council. Section 274, Section 275 to Section 278 say this. So you have a law, the Urban Councils Act, which says in Section 314 that the Minister of Local Government, the esteemed July Moyo, I'm sure he's going to be reappointed, can issue a directive that reverses any decision that a local authority can make. And we saw him abusing this power. The George Nix Pomona dumping site case is a case in point. Sito Ferrari set on the 7th of July 2022 and reversed that agreement, nullified that agreement. July Moy writes a letter on the 12th of July saying, reinstating that agreement and paying George Nix from amounts that are due to the Sito Ferrari in respect of devolution. It's not just Section 314 of the Urban Councils Act, which is pernicious. You have the provisions of the Urban Councils Act, which obliged all procurement to be done in terms of the State Procurement Board and not the local authority itself. You have provisions in the Urban Councils Act that require the budget of local authorities to be consented to by the Minister of Local Government and the Minister of Finance. You have in the Urban Councils Act provisions that create a local government board that says any city cannot employ a senior official without approval of the local government board, which is a synonym for the Minister of Local Government. So you have got total emasculation of local authorities by the minister, by the central government. And one of the things that is most pernicious is, of course, the issue of devolution. devolution has not been actualized. Almost 10 years after 2023, the law actualizing Chapter 14 of the Constitution, actualizing devolution, has still not been passed. We've just had elections right now in which provincial representatives have been elected, but they're not going to serve because the devolution law has not been enacted, notwithstanding that there are 3 or 4 judgments obliging the government to actually enact that law. So challenges are there. That's why we need citizen agency, and we need the activism of the citizen in their organizations, in civic society, and of course in parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biti. Thanks for your insights, and we appreciate your time. I see Dr. Mpofu is back on. Hopefully we can try him now before he...
Chief Matutu, can you hear me?
Before he... Yes, I can hear you, sir. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Matutu, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Mpofu, please go ahead. Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Yes, you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope the colleagues in attendance can also hear me. I've been struggling to stay on here. I must express my gratitude to Tendai Biti for dealing, I think, effectively with the legal fundamentals around this topic. That homework that he has done allows me then to deal with, I think, the political issues that might be hanging by the side. The interesting part of this topic that we're treating today is the unknown part, that we're dealing with a kind of unknown, a mysterious kind of future. But deploying historical observation and analysis and political analysis itself, we can find ways of knowing what might happen and how that might happen. To start with, we're dealing with a presidency that is occupied by a president that is knowable, and that is in this case known. And the first question in our attempt will be, how did that president come to be? What is the political history that has produced this presidency and this president? How did he seek, find, and keep political power thus far? If we look at those questions and we apply them on the subject matter at hand, which is the presidency of this president, we might actually be able to, from some reasonable grounds, say something about what might happen. That takes us to the history of ZANU-PF as it has come to be, right from the camps in Mozambique up to its incumbency in the present. I want to drop the observation that was made by Masipula Stole and John Makumbe, our late professors, who wrote a paper which observed that this unit, this entity, which I call a political cult called ZANU-PF, arrived from the Bush War, occupied or possessed by a one-party state psychology, which means that they did not wish to entertain, or were they ever sold to any idea of multi-party democracy. And what were they going to do? They were going to deploy a combination of force and fraud to seek, find, and keep power under the life presidency of one Robert Mugabe and the de facto one-party state of ZANU-PF. I want to observe that one-party state psychology has not left ZANU-PF, and ZANU-PF as it is has not left that psychology. And that has led, in the history from 1980, the political cult to commit a major genocide to practice state and party terrorism and some acts of ethnic cleansing, and several incidents of choreographing and designing the violent elimination of political opponents within ZANU-PF and without. So that history is the history that has given us this presidency and the president that occupies that place. So elections in Zimbabwe have always happened then, as Marx taught us, first as a tragedy, then as a farce, and I think now elections are happening in Zimbabwe as catastrophes that leave many victims behind, as that combination of force and fraud plays out. Clearly, that's a problem of political leadership. But that problem of political leadership must not blinker or blind us to the huge problem in Zimbabwe of political followership. In practicing acts of electoral fraud, political violence, state and party terrorism, genocide, and ethnic cleansing, these political leaders have had choirs of sycophants, flatterers, and other types of followers, urging them on and creating around them a universe of support to say that what these leaders are doing is all right. Some of these do it for personal benefits, partisan benefits, and some, I think they do it just out of political evil. And political evil being one of the forces that I can confidently claim has produced this particular presidency and this particular president. And that political evil has expressed itself clearly in the Kukuraondi genocide and other spectacular incidents of political violence. Now, for us to be able to try and not predict but project what Emmerson Mnangagwa's next political move might be, we need to look exactly at the genealogy and the provenances of his kind of leadership. First, we must start with the question of guilt. The combination of the Kukuraondi genocide, the now well-known DRC blood diamonds, the many cases of internal assassination of enemies within ZANU-PF, and the assassination of external enemies that are not in ZANU-PF, that are opposed to it, massive cases of corruption that can be called mega corruption. One example being the gold mafia, and another example being one incident that Robert Mugabe highlighted a few months before he was dethroned, the $15 billion that disappeared from the Chiadzwa proceeds. So a president that populates a presidency that is punctuated by these guilty-producing incidents becomes a person that is afraid, a person that is insecure. As we know from classical thinking by now that the guilty are afraid, they flee even when no one pursues, they defend themselves even when no one is attacked, and they are ready to attack anytime. So Emmerson Mnangagwa has been produced by and many other forces that may not allow him to imagine being out without the security and the immunity that the presidential office offers. That is the kind of precarity and the kind of fragility of his kind and his quality of the presidency. Because of these incidents that are guilt producing, he cannot be without power. As a result, he will do anything to keep the power, to keep the office, for the security and the immunity that it offers him. The option then it will be, do you force him out by unconstitutional means? How do you mobilize the agency of Zimbabweans that Tendai Biti has been talking about to compel this kind of incumbent to respect the political will of the people of Zimbabwe? After the question of fear, Chief Matutu, there is the question, after the question of guilt, there is the question of fear. Guilty individuals are also terrified individuals. Terrified in the sense in which sometime in 2003, Doris Lessing actually described Robert Mugabe himself then as a terrified little man who daily performs some acts of bravado, some acts of courage, and some acts of fearlessness that actually conceal rather than reveal the actualities of fear that occupy this individual. We are dealing with a president that is afraid because of the crimes committed, because of the massive ill-gotten wealth, because of the many victims produced, and because of the many enemies inside and outside ZANU-PF that surround the individual. And that fear alone makes the individual very dangerous. I'm experiencing some echoes. I don't know where they're coming from. Can I still be heard, Chief?
Yes, we can hear you. Mr. Biti, please.
Yes, you can go ahead now. I think it's sorted. It's fixed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
I was trying to provide some clarity on the question of fear that proceeds from the guilt that occupies the incumbent. And this fear makes this individual dangerous in that they will always resort to the available instruments of violence, fraud, disappearances, eliminations, and poisonings. There's a very interesting paper written by Professor Miles Stanley about the Zimbabwean intelligence and presidential succession. I think it's a 2013 excuse me, publication. And one of their figures from the intelligence sector that Miles Stanley interviewed disclosed that actually one of the tools at their disposal is the tool of poisoning opponents. And this agent actually disclosed to Miles Stanley that these agents, in terms of the poisons that are used, were sourced from, is it Kazakhstan? And the way they are deployed and the way they operate is that they manifest in the body symptoms of generic diseases that are now known. So some of the poisons will simulate symptoms of HIV, others symptoms of sugar diabetes, others symptoms of cancers, and other symptoms of high blood pressure and other diseases that we have come to understand. Zimbabweans and all of us here can just look around in the Zimbabwean political landscape and see just how many political figures were exhausted, were eliminated using what appeared like natural causes, including the COVID-19 pandemic that we saw opportunistically targeting, especially those individuals from the security sector that participated actively in the coup that dethroned Robert Mugabe in 2017. So we can see the kind of political climate the kind of environment, the kind of individual, and the kind of presidency that is in place, and the many dangers and the many possibilities of darkness, blood, and other calamities. So I hope I've managed to flesh out the question of fear that occupies this individual and the institution and the office that they currently occupy, and the dangers that confront Zimbabwe. Quickly, I want to rush to the question of what kind of regime is this? Because if we are to project what might happen to us, we need to look closely at the nature of the regime, politically and otherwise. I've previously characterized this regime as a native colonialist regime, in that the way they've held on to power through domination by force, that is a colonial way of doing things. The way friends, family, and France of the president have monopolized the Zimbabwean economy. Think about the gold mafia just as a small tip of the large iceberg. That is also a colonial way of handling a country's economy as they have been handling the polity. So what does a native colonialist regime do? It does everything colonial except that it is native, populated by natives of the country. That tells us then that we must look forward to another future of political domination and economic exploitation. What these individuals in this political cult have done, they've put in place the exact economic and political conditions that forced some Zimbabweans in the 70s to leave their homes, to leave their villages, to go and conduct an armed liberation struggle against Rhodesian secular colonialism. That defines a native colonialist regime. Quickly after that, and I hope colleagues in the opposition and in the civil society know what is done, what has been done elsewhere in the world to deal with colonialist regimes, how to fight against them, how to resist them, and how to push back against them. That's what needs to be deployed. Quickly, I want to move on to the huge prospects of another military coup in Zimbabwe. I've actually said this before, that all the ingredients for another coup are in place. What is left is the actual mixing and the actual cooking. Why do I say that? Not just because coups beget coups, but what we have because of the coup in 2017, which was successfully sold to SADC and the AU as something else and not a coup, but it was a coup. We have a politicized army, an army that is composed of soldiers that now know that it is possible and it can be done successfully to dethrone a government militarily. That's one ingredient. Another ingredient is the fierce internal divisions in ZANU-PF and in the security sector. Divisions that will not be publicly performed, but that we know exist. The third ingredient is a ready population. Zimbabweans have been pushed so far against the political wall that they are now ready for any form of political change, even if it's unconstitutional. The fourth ingredient
Mr. Chairman, it seems we've lost the speaker.
Hello, yeah, I'm back. Zimbabwe network challenges here. Hello.
Thanks, Dr. Mpofu. We'll keep trying to reconnect with you.
Hello. Yes,
hopefully.
yes. Can you hear me, everybody?
Okay, Desmond, let me take over. While we're trying to reconnect with Dr. Mpofu, I think I'll give the floor to Mr. KEK. You wanted to ask Mr. Biti a question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me up here. And again, some of my questions might is more like a lot of my reading, but I guess in a few questions I have is obviously it seems like the last amendment was simulated in 2017, and my question is what was the current, because with the election now kind of seemingly is taking place on the 23rd, what was the current, because I don't necessarily know, but that's why I'm asking, because I have a further question, is what was the necessarily current modality of how was the balloting done? Was it done via paper balloting or electronic balloting or both? That's my first question, because I have a question to that.
Can I have another question, Mdu?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, we don't have many requests.
It seems we are having
right now.
Challenges here, so we can proceed.
Please, KEK, sorry, to answer your question, you asked if there was electronic balloting, you say? No, we do not use electronic voting in Zimbabwe. Sorry.
Okay. So is that, do people feel that maybe the form of voting itself is a deterrent for people to even show up for voting, so people don't vote because they know like them trying to do a paper vote or a ballot vote is one of wasted time, so they don't show up even if they want change? And two, what is the reality that technologies can be explored more to succeed more, things like digital voting or a vote with whether people understand what this term is or not, blockchain technology for transparency of voting, that certain other societies and nations are leaning towards to succeed these sort of aspects, that a vote was illegitimate, the vote was a fraud, the vote was manipulated. And so that's one question, is what do people feel like the technology, the advancements of technology on a global level can help, or how much farther out can like genocides and frauds and military coups happen until like people are beating their heads against the wall to maybe just make something easier and simpler, which is innovation of, again, technology for more transparency to a legitimate vote, if that's not being applied right now. Also, like how much is how much that type of push in a general consensus being put out in medias, like even like this place, this venue on this app, in the news in Zimbabwe, in papers about, lifting up technological modernization to help combat these violences, unneeded deaths, unneeded repressions to continue like that, is a question.
Thanks,
yeah.
Thanks, Chief. I'm sure Mr. Biti will pass a comment.
Mr. Biti, you can go ahead and respond to the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is the thing. For a long time, we've pushed for biometric voting. So what you have in Zimbabwe is that you have got a biometric voters roll, but the voting itself is manual and archaic. Our registrar, this is the office that collects all data on births and on deaths, that issues identity cards and passports, is actually fairly advanced in respect of collection of data in respect of collection of biometric data. So the transition to biometric voting, the transition to the use of blockchain and modern technologies in voting should be so easy. But I think the reason why they have not implemented it, because they are aware that it limits once the situation and the infrastructure has been put, it limits avenues of stealing an election, and it also provides ready-made data to anyone not rather dissatisfied with an election. I don't think that Zimbabwe will successfully resist the floods of change. An election was held as recent as October of 2022 in Lesotho. It was biometric voting technology. They were using tablets. The Kenyan election as well in August of last year, 2022, was also biometric and technology. I've been to Somaliland of all places, which is not even a state recognized by the United Nations, in Yegisa and other provinces. Despite their challenges, they were in fact using biometric voting and tablets. And anyone who has been privy to those tablets and biometric voting, it will resolve a lot of the trust deficit that is associated with our own electoral system and our own elections. And I hope that we can move to biometric voting, because the data is actually biometric. If you go to a registry office right now, they can give you your passport, they can give you your ID almost immediately, because they've got data on everyone. We are moving towards a digital age, and there's no reason why Zimbabwe should not adopt biometric voting.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
thanks,
you,
Mr. Biti.
Mr. So, just a gentle reminder, our discussion we are having here, and we are discussing about the constitution that was adopted in 2013, which introduced the term limits of presidents, limiting a president to 2 5-year terms. So President Emerson Mnangagwa, who has just been at the helm, he has been at the helm, he is now at the helm, has been controversially been inaugurated for a second and final term. And in our history in Zimbabwe, this is the first time of the country to have a president's term that starts as a countdown to his exit. So just to try and understand what the next 5 years might look like, we are joined by the former finance minister, Tendai Biti, and Dr. William Jethro Mpofu, a researcher at the Wits University in South Africa. So yeah, we continue as we try to wind up. If anybody has some questions, you might raise your hands up, and you can put your questions to Mr. Biti and our doctor from Wits University, Mr. Jethro.
Yes, can I go ahead?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you. First of all, I wanted to address Jethro a little bit, because a lot of what he was talking about seems to be conspiracy theories with no proof, with no names of these people that he says were negatively affected by the Zimbabwe government. So I'm very, very worried about that. We would like to, as an esteemed researcher that he claims to be, would like to hear certain names of people that have been murdered, or that have been that have been what did he say, that were injected with some sort of thing that makes them seem like they die of natural causes, because that is a huge conspiracy theory coming from a learned person, and he does not give us a name to even for reference in that regard, which is very worrying, because we do hear these conspiracy theories that go a long way, and yet there's no actual proof. So that's very, very worrying to me. Secondly, diving into this unknown, Mr. BT, and I appreciate your presence. Thank you very much, guys. We dove into the unknown when we had the GNU in 2008, where you were finance minister, and of which during that period as well, the MDC also partook in the writing of the new constitution that now governs Zimbabwe. And we took a deep dive into that. We saw some sort of economic accession. We saw some of our economy getting better. But then it seems to me at that point that it was only artificial, and was only it was only because Western funders were essentially releasing funds into Zimbabwe, and then it seemed like artificial growth because it soon went down, and there was no sustainable economic growth that actually entailed your ministry, your period as finance minister. But right now, as we speak, as we're going into the second term of our of Emerson Mnangagwa's second and final term, one can argue that there has been pillars of sustainable economic growth that are being put in place. For example, we over the last 5 years during his first term, we saw that there was the banning of exportation of raw granite, of which granite is something that is used by a lot of people because people are building houses in Zimbabwe. And then that meant that granite had to be processed in Zimbabwe because our president saw that we're sending raw granite over to whoever is mining it to their countries, and then they process it. And then secondly, the more important one was the banning of exportation of raw lithium, which also regardless of whether he's here or not, but those policies are going to encourage economic growth and employment in Zimbabwe. We have also seen over the last 5 years, when it comes to sustainable economic growth or pillars of sustainable economic growth, we have seen how our president has been working hard to ensure that electricity and power is something that is constant and uninterrupted. And as much as that is still a work in progress, but then there is progress. And then also we've also seen over the last 5 years that Zimbabwe's GDP growth has consistently grown. We've also seen over the last 5 years that we broke 3 records of production. The first one being gold, the second one being wheat, and this year being tobacco. Those things are they not a reason for a positive outlook on Zimbabwe when it comes to economic growth? Because as much as we may want to say that if we change power, things are going to change overnight, that's never going to be the case, especially when we're considering that we have this law that is called the Zimbabwe Democracy Economic Recovery Act, that is called ZIDERA, that is also hindering us in our growth. But we are still going towards our growth, and the numbers don't lie. So is there not a reason, I'll be landing, is there not a reason then to be more positive in the outlook of Zimbabwe in the next 5 years?
Thanks for your question. Lord, please go ahead. Lord.
Thank you very much.
Lord Master.
Thank you very much. I think we all can agree that we've gone through a phase of totally crisis where totally has destroyed the Zimbabwean economy.
I'm not sure if anyone can hear. Lord Master, please go ahead.
Yes.
I can hear him, yeah. I can hear him.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I have 3 questions for Honorable BT. One, does he think, so it becomes political, doesn't he think now it's time for...
Can anyone hear him?
They can hear me, but...
I can hear him, but then Lord Ryan, I think you need to drop down and come back because people can't hear you.
Sure. The villager, please go ahead.
All right. Mr. Biti, I think you can answer to the questions which has been raised so far.
Can anyone hear?
Yes, we can hear him.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll answer. I hope we're now moving to conclusion, Mdu, but I'll
Absolutely,
answer.
sir.
Yeah. So I think that what Jethro was talking about, the assassinations, the strange deaths, those are not anecdotes. Those are, you might not have given names, but this is common cause. ZANU was not born yesterday. ZANU was not born yesterday. Violence has always been a systematic, inextricable arsenal of our history and the liberation narrative. And unfortunately, it is in fact the narrative of Zimbabwe. As I keep on arguing, this country since 1890 is not known more than 10 years of uninterrupted peace. We are set in permanent crisis, and the liberation struggle itself was lacerated with histories of assassinations. I can give you names. The most famous name being Chairman Chitepo, who was assassinated in March of 1975. The death, for instance, on the 26th of December 1999 of Commander Josiah, Tongogara, the Nari Rebellion of January 1976, and those that were eliminated. Sorry, of 1975, and those that were killed, people like Thomas Bads and so forth. Very unfortunate stories, very unfortunate incidents that happened in Zambia, with many people being buried at places like Chifombo in Zambia. Then you've got January 1976, the uprisings of the young revolutionaries, the Vashanti, led by people like Dzinashe Machingura, again assassinations during the liberation struggle itself. Then you've got 1978, the uprising of people like Amadziripi, Rugare Gumbo, and others. Many people were killed. Post-independence, 2 years after independence, we had Kukura Wundi, 81 to 87. We had Operation Murambatsvina. We had the violence associated with the 2008 election. My generation in the change movement, we lost thousands and thousands of cadres, the likes of Tundera Indira and so forth. So what Jethro was talking about is not anecdotal, and it has been written a lot. He referred to Miles Tendi. I think you ought to read Miles Tendi's book on General Mujuru, and every Zimbabwean knows that he was assassinated in 2012. So it's not anecdotal. It's not anecdotal at all. I want to come to your characterization of the growth experience during the GNU as a bubble, or that it was inspired by money that came from the West. Far from it. We hardly got any overseas development assistance that was in excess of $600 million per year, which is in fact consistent with what Mutuli has been receiving in the last 5 years. But we ran the economy on certain fundamentals. One of the fundamentals was that
Yes, my brother.
You may need to unmute him then.
Hello, can you hear
All
me?
right. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you
Yeah,
now.
I can hear you, Mr. Biti.
Apologies for that.
Okay, all right. So let me just conclude by saying that since 2014 to now, the economy, we have serious structural problems. And part of the problem has been an expansionary fiscal policy that has created deficits, which deficits has been monetized by the creation of money. The introduction of the bond note in 2016 was a disaster, a complete disaster that led to the devaluation of the Zimbabwean currency, that led to the devaluation of Zimbabwean assets. We lost in 2008, our pension industry lost US $5.86 billion dollars. We've gone through two further losses in 2016, where we lost value by 40%, and in 2019, when the government introduced the SI 33 of 2019. These are massive losses of people's income without compensation. The economy requires major structural reform around, number one, the issue of currency. There's a threat, there's a talk of total demonetization of the US dollar, and the resort 100% to the local currency. I think that will be a disaster, a massive disaster that will see contraction of the economy, that will see the economy plunging into a recession, which will soon graduate into a depression. I hope they won't do that. Number two is inflation, and somehow, if you look at the exchange rate right now, the US dollar is now trading at 1:7,500, 1:7,800, meaning that we are already into a mode of an implosion of the exchange rate, an implosion of inflation. So, and I haven't spoken about the collapse of public service, the public health system. Schools opened yesterday. Thousands and thousands of students were not allowed back to school because of school fees, which are being demanded in US dollars on a population that is unemployed or that is earning in RTGS dollars. I've just lost an aunt at Harare hospital. So I spent a few days visiting Harare hospital. It's like a hospital in a war zone. Basic drugs, basic infrastructure that's necessary in a basic hospital is not available. So therefore, I make the case for a soft landing for Zimbabwe. The possibility of a coup that Jethro talks about is not a possibility. It's probably a probability because the ingredients are there. How do you avoid that? You avoid that through creation of a soft landing. So we are in a huge crisis. We are in a huge crisis yet again. A crisis arising out of a stolen election. A crisis arising out of legitimacy. A crisis arising out of weak institutions. A crisis arising out of an economy that is not growing, and in the few pockets that it is growing, it's not shared growth. That situation requires leadership, not just the internal leadership, but also external leadership. Our situation requires the scaffolding of international law in the form of SADC, in the form of the African Union. If that doesn't happen, as I said at the beginning, you're going to see massive implosion of immigrants across the length and breadth of Zimbabwe. And South Africa, more than any other country, will suffer this implosion. You're going to see massive dislocation, increase in polarity, increase in politics of exclusion, a total stalemate, total decapitation of the nation state as we know it today. And this is the fertile ground for a military coup. Nobody wants this. Nobody likes this. But we're talking about it so that there is necessary, essential leadership and agents of the citizen to address these omissions and commissions.
Thank you very much, Comrade Biti. I think we have had you here for an hour and 45 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. It's unfortunate we lost Dr. Mpofu, but perhaps some other time. And thanks to our readers. We appreciate your support as always. Good night.